More in just a moment.
Action News, Delaware Valley's leading news program, with Scott Palmer, Dave Roberts, Lisa Thomas-Laurie, and Mark Howard.
Good evening. In the news, Lisa's off tonight. Rob Jennings joins us. In the news, Camden's Campbell's Soup announces nearly 200 layoffs despite posting a record profit.
And conflicting reports tonight on whether Saddam Hussein's troops are involved in more fighting in Iraq.
But the big story on Action News tonight is Hurricane Fran, less than 100 miles off the coast of the Carolinas and heading for the shore. And all the wishing and sign painting won't work. Fran will not scram. Hundreds of thousands of people have evacuated the barrier islands. And while the eye of the storm is 6 or 7 hours away, the high winds and the rain on the leading edge of the storm are already moving in. Let's go outside now to Dave Roberts with the latest facts and figures. Dave, it looks like Fran, unlike Edward, will not spare us.
No, definitely. Fran is there just off the North Carolina-South Carolina border. Here's a satellite picture now. Satellite 6 watching the storm, as we have been for several days now. You see the movement there coming up and just itching its way closer to that border. Let's go closer now, and we'll show you the facts and figures. Now, 115 mile per hour. Top winds. It remains a Category 3, a very dangerous hurricane moving west-northwest at 16 miles per hour. It is now just 80 miles south-southeast of that South Carolina-North Carolina border. All right, what does that mean for us in terms of, there you go, there's a live picture of Cape Hatteras, and you can see that live radar shot there, that heavy cell, the leading edge of the storm, as it's making landfall just about right on that point between the border there of North and South Carolina. That's a live picture from Action Radar. Here's a projection now. Once it does get on land, by about noon on Friday, we're expecting it to go right up the middle of the state, be close to the Virginia border there in North Carolina, Virginia, and then by midnight on Friday, you can see it making its way through Maryland on into central Pennsylvania. We are projecting that it does that. Now, there's a couple of other paths. You see one farther to the west and one farther to the east, which of course includes us. Depending on Fran's path, after it does hit land, that will indicate how much rain and how strong the winds are here in the tri-state area. We just have to watch and wait. But for now, the people along that South Carolina, North Carolina border are getting hit and getting hit hard. That's the latest. Rob?
Thanks, Dave. As we said earlier, residents in the Carolinas are hoping for the best, but they're preparing for the worst. Action News reporter Cecily Tynan was in Charleston, South Carolina for live reports last night at 11 and again today at noon. She and photographer Bob Kravitz have now moved 100 miles north to Myrtle Beach, where the storm's really starting to kick up. And as you're about to see, it's also affecting our satellite link from South Carolina.
Well, we made it here from Charleston, South Carolina. We're now in Myrtle Beach, where Fran is expected to make landfall later on tonight. When Bob Kravitz and I were driving in, we had to stop at a checkpoint. They're not letting anybody into the island unless they show proof of ID that they do live here. They're expected to then get their belongings and either leave or get to a shelter. Curfews have been extended. If you're seen walking around the beach, a police car will come by and tell you to get inside, seek shelter. The wind is certainly already at tropical storm force and expected to get to hurricane storm force a little bit later on. Some of the palm trees are blowing as we were arriving here. Already seeing some wind damage right now. Some signs have been blown over. The stoplights are flailing in the wind, but of course this will be getting worse.
And this is Cecily Tynan now. I'm live on the telephone, and to give you an update on the wind conditions, winds right now are gusting to about 60 miles an hour, and now that the storm is continuing, it's less than 100 miles from the coast. They expect the hurricane-force winds will be kicking up within the next couple of hours. I'm looking at the seas right now, and the storm surge is at about 15 feet right now. We are seeing some flooding. Also, there has been a problem with electricity. The electricity in the hotel has been going out, and they're now powering on generators. But we continue to monitor the situation as Hurricane Fran comes closer, and we'll have more updates coming up at 5:30 and 6 on Action News. I'm Cecily Tynan reporting live from Myrtle Beach, South Carolina.
So, thanks, Cecily. Take care of yourselves there. As Fran gets closer to the Delaware Valley in the days ahead, the storm could have a big impact here, but already its effects are being felt. Amtrak has suspended rail service on some southern routes which run through the coastal Carolinas, like the Silver Meteor. It runs from Miami to New York. Also, airports along the Carolina coast, as you can imagine, have shut down, and we'll have more on the last Philadelphians to fly out of the area coming up at 5:30. Meanwhile, at the local Red Cross headquarters in Center City, disaster service officials are tracking the progress of Fran on their computers, like we are. In addition, supplies are also being loaded into an emergency response vehicle. 2 local volunteers are already in the Carolinas with one of these trucks. The boxes contain everything from blankets to toothpaste and toothbrushes, items often overlooked in the rush to evacuate. And that's our coverage of Hurricane Fran up to the moment.
In Wrightsville Beach, North Carolina, to keep us updated on this particular storm, and we'll help to remain focused on those guys as long as they can keep reporting with the strong winds and the heavy rains yet to come in, even more than what they've experienced so far. We will continue to track this storm. We'll look at the satellite perspective now, John, bring everybody up to date on what the structure of the storm looks like as it continues to move on off more to the north than anything else, considering the last report. Look at the hues of orange and yellow. What is that telling us, everybody?
That's where the higher cloud tops are, and that pretty well coincides with where the heaviest rain is falling. And of course, a lot of that rain, very heavy rain still offshore, as we'll see on the radar in just a minute. But nevertheless, substantial rains have already moved inland. A good many inches of rain in some of those areas. As far as the structure of the storm is concerned, Dennis, I'm not seeing a whole lot of change. It doesn't seem to be getting particularly better organized, but it is certainly holding its own. So now we have every indication that the eye will make landfall at somewhere around its current maximum sustained winds of 115 miles an hour. And of course, as you know, there are higher gusts than that.
And looking at the overall structure on the visible satellite photograph, it looks like we've better defined that eye that went through a couple of hours of kind of raggedness. It looks like it's defining a little bit better now.
Well, I don't want to see it get defined very much better, because I don't want this hurricane to increase anymore, and hopefully it will get inland before it can do that.
And a reminder to our viewing audience, it is a Category 3 on a Safford-Simpson scale of 1 to 5, as it is now continuing to pack winds of 115 miles an hour. Radar display out of Wilmington, North Carolina, Doppler radar site indicating some of the heavier intensity coming down. Let me give you an idea. It's kind of hard to see here. This is the North Carolina border. Right in there is the separation into South Carolina. And our crews were located basically right about in that area and right about in that area. This would have been Jim up in here and Jeff back here in South Carolina. Give you an idea of what the rain that they were going through that we saw from their vantage point just a couple of minutes ago. John, they're really getting blasted with some pretty good rains and winds right now.
They are, and they're going to continue for quite some time to come here.
And we were talking earlier, what kind of time frame would you expect the eye to make landfall?
Well, now we're, I guess, less than, about 80-some miles from the coast, so at 20 miles an hour, that'd be 4 hours, and it's not quite that fast, so I guess I'd have to say 5 hours or thereabouts.
Okay. And with that in mind, Modesto Beach all the way back up to North Carolina, Virginia border, hurricane warnings are in effect. If you had not made necessary precautions or preparations yet, you need to do it now. And in fact, it may be better to stay where you're at to ride out the rest of the storm. What do you think?
It's generally, if you're up in northeastern North Carolina or the southeastern part of North Carolina, it's really too late now to move. You need to stay put.
Okay. And also, we're talking about the strike probability. We've kind of narrowed that window to pretty much be very close to the extreme southern tip of North Carolina.
And very likely we could narrow it a bit more, too, Dennis.
Okay. And as we also look at the hurricane force winds are starting to buffet the coastline, especially around Cape Fear.
We're going to update this because we've had reports now, certainly of hurricane force winds on shore already.
The accuracy of Jeff's friend's anemometer at 54 miles an hour was pretty much on the mark. They're reporting 55 right now at the airport at Myrtle Beach.
Yes.
Got to have that anemometer stick around through the evening. We'll get a very accurate reading. As you can see, though, you go inland a little bit, they're still only running about 20 to 30 miles an hour, but still something to be reckoned with. Speaking of something to be reckoned with, I don't think Fran is over with just in the next 4 or 5 hours when it makes landfall. It's going to be a story for the next several days.
Well, first of all, as we saw, and with Hurricane Hugo, whenever you have a hurricane this strong, the hurricane force winds are going to extend inland for a ways. Generally, we're more concerned about hurricane force winds right on the coast. But in this case, we believe we could see hurricane winds and gusts anyway up to about 100 miles inland. And then after that, Dennis, the rain in inland areas will be what we have to worry about.
And the immediate future, too, tonight as it makes landfall, will be that storm surge.
Yes, we do expect to see 12 to 16 feet, something in that order there. And that will be in the area right where the eye comes in, where the center of the eye comes in, and then off to the northeast for about another 40 or 50 miles is where we expect to see storm surges as high as that.
But I guess if there's any light at the end of the tunnel of all this unfortunate news is the fact of it may be coming in at low tide.
Well, it will, unless it slows down tremendously. We had the high tide this afternoon, mid-afternoon or a little later. The next one will be well after midnight, and it appears, anyway, that the eye of the hurricane is going to come ashore in between those two high tides.
Okay. Thank you so much, John, for all the information. John Hope, our hurricane specialist here at the Weather Channel, keeping us focused and updated. We'll also keep you updated on what's going on the beaches from Wrightsville Beach with Jim Cantori and Myrtle Beach from Jeff Morrow as the evening wears on. Keep your weather dial right here on your cable network. The Weather Channel will keep you informed on the very latest on Hurricane Fran. We'll also give you an idea what you can expect as far as a forecast. Let's get you back to the studio.
Okay, guys.
Hurricane Fran from the Weather Channel.
They rate hurricanes on an intensity of 1 to 5 on a scale. Hurricane Fran, a Category 3 on the Safford-Simpson scale, is continuing to keep focus on the North Carolina-South Carolina border area right now. Thank you for joining us on the Weather Channel. In the Forecast Center, I'm Dennis Smith, alongside our hurricane specialist, John Hope, with some of the latest information continuing and pretty much on course.
Pretty much on course. If it's changed at all, we see a movement a bit more toward the north, as opposed to north-northwest compared to a couple hours ago.
Keeping that in mind, probably more of a focus on the state of North Carolina versus South Carolina?
I should think so. It seems aimed pretty much up at Wilmington right now.
Okay.
Up in that general direction.
Now that's an area that's already had, that general area, pretty much a battering from Hurricane Bertha earlier in this year.
And we know some very strong winds right offshore there. We've hurricane force winds are onshore. Down at Frying Pan Shoals, which is 50 miles or so southeast of Cape Pier, they have a peak wind of 115 miles an hour on the last observation.
And also you mentioned within the last hour or two there was a boat that was a ship that was probably lost that was experiencing some pretty rough seas as well.
Yeah, about 45 feet or so, and actually had about 98 mile an hour sustained wind.
45 feet. The average home 8-foot ceilings, that's 6 stories. You're talking about pretty tough waves.
I'm not sure I'd like to go up and down too many times on those waves.
No, that's for sure. Let's bring you up to date on the very latest with Hurricane Fran. Our information indicates the latest as of 5 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time from the National Hurricane Center, indicating the center of the storm at 32.9 north, 77.9 west. Keep in mind, that is a central point of the low pressure with Fran. The effects of Fran, of wind, rain, and rough seas, extend well out from that center point. That center point, if on a single plot, would be 95 miles south of Wilmington, North Carolina, with 115 mile an hour winds moving north-northwest at 16. And again, John, those have shown very little change for about 4 or 5 hours now. Still the same general wind speed and the same general forward direction.
Right, and we're sort of, I think it's pretty well locked in now on its present intensity. I don't think we'll see it increase very much. It just doesn't have enough water to operate on now.
Well, the best way to describe how those conditions are being felt along the beach is to let you know where someone that is out there and reporting for us here at the Weather Channel, and that's our own Jeff Morrow. He's at Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, pretty far up the coastline in South Carolina. Jeff, give us an update of some of the conditions you're experiencing as this storm is less than 100 miles from you right now.
I'm feeling very fortunate, Dennis, that we are on the leeward side of this building and not on the windward side. Very fortunate. We are facing the ocean, and I'll have Randy pan out here and show you some of the wild surf that we're looking at here. We're just marveling at the size of these waves, and with the wind basically offshore here, it's holding some of the wave faces up. Just tremendous waves, I'd say about at least 15 feet high, some of these things. And we were just looking at a wave that loomed up on the horizon, and you can't see very far out there because it's raining pretty hard. I'd say maybe a couple hundred yards, but out there had to have been at least a 20 to 25 foot wave, at least a 20-foot wave that crested way out there. It was impressive, to say the least. This is probably the worst that we've seen as far as the surf is concerned. The fortunate thing here, again, we do want to remind everybody living here in northeast South Carolina, particularly along the Grand Strand, that the wind is basically either alongshore or offshore, and the tide is going out right now. Those are both contributing factors to limit any kind of storm overwash at this point. We have not really seen anything except for some surf up to the dune line here. Of course, there is going to be some beach erosion. The beach is going to get rearranged here, obviously, but have not heard of any major damage to anything at the present time. And as long as we can keep that wind offshore, and with a hurricane going north, I think we will, I think we're in pretty good shape.
Jeff, you've been in the area for several hours this afternoon. Give us kind of a chronological picture of what's been happening throughout the afternoon.
It's incredible, Dennis. When we woke up this morning, and granted we were up pretty early before sunrise, at about 5:30 or 5:45, it couldn't have been more calm. There was no wind. It was almost dead calm. The surf was maybe 2 feet at that point. It was nothing. And now in the order of about 12 hours, it's just tremendously turned around. Randy and I were talking about this last night. Without the satellite imagery, without all the modern technology that we have to tell us this hurricane was out there, you would have never known it this morning and probably been very surprised to see this afternoon. It's just an amazing thing how quickly that weather turned around today.
And again, that's why we're so thankful of all the technology we have today, because many people lost their lives in storms, and I'm sure John can remember several storms. 1900 storm in Galveston with very little warning, 1935 storm in the Keys, devastating storms without the technology we have today.
Several thousand people lost their lives in Galveston and several hundred in the Keys in 1935, so that could happen. Jeff, I'm assuming those waves we're looking at there are coming in from the southeast, and you have the wind blowing almost the opposite direction, so that gives you quite an effect there, holding up the shoreward side of those waves almost perpendicular.
Oh, it is, John. It's amazing. It's holding the waves, the faces of the waves up with that wind offshore. You can see the spray that's being blown off the top of some of these waves. It's just a long progression of swells. For a surfer, if there wasn't all this wind and everything, they would be spectacular, almost Hawaii-like surfing waves. It's just amazing. Now, we're not saying that any surfer should even remotely consider going out. In fact, there were some out earlier, but they are awfully pretty to look at, and it's very spectacular.
From a distance, they're pretty.
Yeah, from a distance. You got that right.
Jeff, a lot of folks were affected by Hurricane Hugo 7 years ago and probably heeded some of the warnings associated with Hurricane Bertha earlier this year as it made landfall in North Carolina. Do you feel like the tourists and the residents there probably had a little bit more heightened awareness, a little heightened anxiety about the whole thing?
Yeah, it depended on who you talked to, Dennis, but I think everybody was very aware. I think Hugo woke everybody up here back in the 80s, and when it went in south of here, which made all the difference, the overwash here was tremendous. There was water in a lot of these hotels in the first floor. A lot of beach got wiped out. It was pretty nasty. There was a fair amount of damage here that was done because of that, and they knew that this storm was close to maybe getting up toward a Hugo strength. We know now that it's a little bit less than Hugo, but still they knew what kind of a storm it could possibly be, and everybody heeded the evacuations pretty much.
Great. Thank you, Jeff, for your report coming to us from Myrtle Beach, South Carolina with that update, and of course we'll come back to you probably towards the top of the hour again.
Okay.
Again, hearing from Myrtle Beach, folks get a pretty good idea how rapidly things change when you go from calm conditions shortly after dawn to now ravaged seas and strong winds and heavy rains.
Well, the other thing is it's remarkable how much difference there is between the western semicircle of a hurricane and the eastern semicircle. He's got the offshore winds there, and they're not going to get nearly the effects of this hurricane that they did from Hugo there in Myrtle Beach.
And the major effect would be farther up the coastline in North Carolina.
In North Carolina, that's another story entirely.
Okay, let's bring them up to date, show them the satellite perspective, give them an idea of the bands of precipitation and the strong winds that are wrapping around this storm system. Probably more impressive to me is the visible satellite shot. And again, you can see that eye. This little point that sticks out for geography purposes, let me see if I can line you up just right. Right in there is Cape Fear, and here's the center of the storm aiming almost to the north, so it appears it may be inching in very close to that part of the North Carolina shoreline.
It will be there before too many more hours, Dennis.
And the conditions are probably feeling on Long Bay and Onslow Bay, probably some pretty rough seas right now.
Well, conditions are going down fairly rapidly, but the big change will be when the eye wall gets there. As that eye wall goes over there. Now they're experiencing gusts of hurricane force, but when the eye wall comes in, that's when you'll see your winds of 100 plus.
Heavy rain's also a factor as they wrap around this storm system, coming around in the characteristic counterclockwise flow, as you do with North American lows, Northern Hemisphere lows, I should say. Once again, you can drive some of those heavy rains inland. I would not be surprised to find some 4 to 8 inches of rainfall with this system near the coastline.
Near the coastline, and then inland farther is where we're very concerned about the rain, especially once we get up in the mountains in North Carolina, Virginia, and Maryland, and West Virginia, and Pennsylvania. Folks up there are certainly going to have to watch because the ground is already saturated.
Hurricane warnings out from Edisto Beach all the way up to the North Carolina-Virginia border, and already if evacuations and necessary preparations have not been made, it's almost too late. Stay where you're at and continue to ride the storm. Just hope that you're in a secured location. There you can see the tropical storm warnings outlined on the periphery of that area, but also concerned is the strike probability. It's pretty well narrowed the window to the North Carolina coastline now.
Yeah, that's what we need to look at is a dark red area. Now, if I were down at Edisto Beach or Charleston, I'd be feeling very good about this storm now. I think that they have certainly escaped the brunt of the storm.
But those residents that are anywhere from Wilmington to North Myrtle Beach, probably more heightened anxiety as it inches a little closer.
Exactly.
Strong winds, as we talked about. In fact, Jeff reported in his last report that some of the winds may be exceeding 50 miles an hour, and that's verified with what we're reporting as far as wind gusts along the coastline. And a reminder, not just the storm surge, which we will show to you where it's expected to be the highest, that being on the North Carolina border, that wall of the water as it comes on in and eats away, but also we can expect heavy rainfall, gusty winds, and John, this story won't be over with in 6 hours. It'll continue for a couple of days.
That's right. Storm surge tonight, the highest part of the storm surge will be whenever the eye comes ashore. That'll be 4 hours from now or so. But then after that, after the winds and the seas calm down on the beaches, then our worry with this hurricane is going to shift inland to the rainfall. And also we'd like to point out that a hurricane as strong as this, it will have some gusts of hurricane force as much as 100 or so miles inland.
So quite an impact. Maybe not as strong as far north as Charlotte was with Hurricane Hugo, but definitely much of North Carolina will experience hurricane force winds early in the evening.
No, it won't for two reasons, Dennis. This is not as strong as Hugo was, and it's not moving as fast as Hugo did.
Okay, but still there will be some winds there to contend with. Alrighty. From the beaches of North and South Carolina to the forecast center of the Weather Channel, we'll continue to keep you focused in on Hurricane Fran, but to help you focus in on the rest of the nation and its forecast, once again, back to the studio.
Okay, the radar also a little more ragged. So it'll be over 100 mile per hour winds there. Exactly how much over, I don't know. And it will have a very big impact because it's a large hurricane that's had a long time with onshore flow in that area.
Bob, as it hits land, makes landfall, well, the leading edge of it is hitting land now. Where are the strongest winds within that eye that people always talk about, the entire hurricane? Where are the strongest winds?
Normally right around the eye wall. This is the eye wall coming around here. So they'll be right here on the northeast side, and that's now just moving towards the Wilmington area. Looks like the center is going to come in very close to Wilmington, maybe slightly towards South Carolina. But that strong wind will be there. The strongest wind will be there probably around 9-10 p.m. this evening.
Of course, high tide down there, I believe, is around 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. They're pretty close together on that. A serious effect with that high tide at that time?
Potentially, because it's such a large storm. Even if the center comes in maybe out of phase with that a little bit, there's still going to be strong onshore flow winds during that period. So there will be an effect from the tide there 2 or 3 in the morning.
Okay, Bob, we're of course concerned also about our track. If it does take a track up toward us, what are your projections as of right now in terms of the tri-state area?
Well, Dave, as you know, in your area, some of the worst damage from hurricanes has occurred in the West Virginia, Pennsylvania area in the past. Some of the major hurricanes like Camille and a couple others that went up through that area. So indeed, coming up here, you get all of this warm, moist air being pumped off the ocean, and you've got the Appalachian chain here with all the uplift. So you're going to have a lot of problems there from flash floods.
Okay, thank you very much, Bob, for joining us live tonight. We'll continue, of course, to track the hurricane. And the worst time for us in terms of precipitation up here seems to be late Friday on into Saturday morning. Stay tuned on that one. Let's take a live picture now, live radar picture on Action Radar, and we'll show you the situation down in Cape Hatteras a little bit closer there. You can see the leading edge of the storm now well into North Carolina. Of course, the eye is yet to come make landfall. That'll probably be about 10, 11 o'clock tonight, so it's a stay-tuned situation. From there, let's go live at Sky 6 down at the shore. They've got the muggies like we have the muggies here, a little fog tossed in. We'll show you the numbers. 87 degrees, that was the high today. We should make that 87. It came at 2:58 this afternoon. Our low 72 degrees. Present temperature reading is 83. The winds are out of the east at 8 miles an hour. For tonight, we're looking for muggy clouds. We've had clouds all day long. The muggies stay with us. Maybe later on, some areas could see some light shower activity. The overnight low, 70 degrees. Friday, cloudy and breezy. A few showers. The winds east-southeasterly 12 to 25 as we start to feel the effects of Fran, a high of 82 degrees. And then, as I said, late Friday on into Saturday is when we'll anticipate the winds and the rain. How much rain, how strong the winds, it all depends on what Fran does, and we'll continue to track it and have the very latest for you here.